Hi guys! So I asked on Twitter the other day whether you would like to see a video about books that made me feel the same way I did when I was reading Harry Potter for the first time or the most recent 100th time. And the answer was a pretty resounding yes. So that is what I'm here to do today. There's something so specific about the way Harry Potter has had an effect on my life and my reading that it's hard to communicate that to people who haven't experienced it. But given the popularity of Harry Potter, I am absolutely certain I'm not alone, and you kind of know what I mean without me having to really describe it. But what I will say is that probably my love for Harry Potter is half timing and half the skill with which that series was created. Now, timing's a massive part of my experience of reading any book, and Harry Potter came to me at exactly the right time. I read the first book when I was 6 years old and then continued to read the books as they came out, and I grew up with them. The final book, I believe, came out when I was around 14 or 15. The characters in that book series grew and developed as I grew and developed as a person and a reader, and ever since then Harry Potter has been a warm, comforting place for me to return to. But Harry Potter wouldn't have had such a big impact on me if it wasn't such a well-constructed series. It is so immersive, it completely takes me out of the everyday world and into something completely new. I completely forget about what's going on around me when I'm reading Harry Potter. The emotions it conjures up in me are visceral. I laugh out loud, I smile as if something genuinely happy has happened, and I am upset as if something genuinely sad has happened when those moments come in the books. They are complex storylines where different elements come together as the series progresses and interweaves together. They have been well thought through. There are multiple characters that you can fall in love with as well as hate but feel passionately about nevertheless, and because of that it is a series that I have very strong attachments to. But it's not the only book series that has made me feel like that. So I wanted to talk about books and series that throughout the years have had a similar effect on me as a reader. Some of them may spark similar feelings in you as readers, some of them may not. Like I said, some of it is to do with timing, but I wanted to tell you about them nevertheless. So without further ado, let's get into the books. So in no particular order, the first series I want to mention is a series I came to when I was 11 years old, and that is The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, beginning with, of course, Eragon. So my experience with this series is slightly different. I read Eragon when I was 11 and it completely captured my imagination. I fell in love with it as much as I'd fallen in love with Harry Potter. It was such an intricate high fantasy series involving my favourite magical creature, which are dragons, and it was so long, there was so much going on in it that I just fell in love. Now, the second book didn't come out until a little while after the first book, and there was quite a big gap for me in reading them because by the time the second book came out I found it kind of difficult to remember what had happened in the first book because so much had happened. So I never finished the second book when it came out. It wasn't until the fourth and final book in the series was coming out, and I was a lot older, maybe like 19 or something, I finally decided to go back to the beginning, remembering how much I'd adored Eragon, and read them from the start and make my way throughout the whole series. And I'm so glad I did, because my rereading of the first book, Eragon, was no less enjoyable than the first time I read it, and I just adored reading the series as a whole. I fell completely in love, and ever since then Eragon has held a place in my heart in this almost as big as Harry Potter has. I have the audiobooks, I like to re-listen to them. It's a world I like to return to when I'm feeling stressed or need somewhere familiar and exciting to return to. So I absolutely adore that series. Like I mentioned, it's set in a high fantasy world and it follows Eragon, a young boy who discovers a dragon egg, and he then becomes the, I don't want to say owner because you don't really own a dragon, but the companion to the dragon that is born from this egg, Saphira, making him the first dragon rider in many years. The dragon riders, since they were at the height of their power, have since almost become extinct as a group, and because of this he is obviously a bit of a target, and it's about his role in the wider political intrigue and system going on in Allegasia, the fantasy world this is set in. And they're so complex, there's so much going on, and there's so many characters to care about. I absolutely love them. I think Christopher Paolini writes amazing characters, characters that change and develop and hold complex relationships with one another, and that I adore about this series. Next I'm going to mention a children's book series I actually read before I read Eragon and was reading at the same sort of time and age as Harry Potter, and it was a series that I eagerly anticipated the release of every book in the same way that I did with Harry Potter really, although I will confess Harry Potter would be my preference, but it did feel like a similar reading experience at the time. I remember being so intrigued by the series, so eager for every release, and that is the Charlie Bourne series by Jenny Nemo. Now this is a children's book series, so again the age I read it at probably had a big impact on the way I experienced it, but even like Harry Potter, this series is actually set at a very special school that includes a bit of a magical side. So it's not a school for exclusively magical children, but there is a group of children that they take on who have magical abilities, including our protagonist Charlie Bourne. Now unlike witches and wizards, these children have one specific magical trait. So Charlie Bourne, for example, can communicate or experience the feelings or the day that was being experienced when he looks at photographs and the people in those photographs. And then there's many other interesting magical traits that are possessed by different characters in the story as well. Charlie Bourne is a member of an eccentric and fascinating family, but his father actually went missing a long time ago, and that has had a heavy toll on him despite being a child. So it's about Charlie Bourne attending this new school, meeting new people, befriending new friends, making enemies, experiencing magical adventures, and learning a little bit more about himself along the way. So unsurprisingly, this one strikes me as something that may interest Harry Potter fans, especially younger readers. Now most recently, the author that almost inspired me to do this video was Libba Bray. I got into Libba Bray's books last year in 2017, and I want to mention two of her series, one of which I've read in full and the other of which I am currently reading. So the series I read in full last year was the one that begins with A Great and Terrible Beauty, and the one I'm reading at the moment is the one that begins with The Diviners, and I have just finished the first in this series and I'm so excited to read the sequel, Lair of Dreams, which I have waiting for me. A Great and Terrible Beauty is set in the late 1800s and follows a teenage girl who has grown up her entire life in India, but her mother has just died, so she's been sent to finish her education at a finishing school just outside of London. At the same time as all of this is going on and her life is changing, she discovers a magical ability in herself to cross over into other realms. A classic of fantasy adventures. Now this book series is so wonderfully all-consuming. It has so many layers to it, it has so many wonderful characters and relationships that develop over the three books, and at the same time it manages to comment on the lives of women in the late 1800s, the restrictions they face, the repressions that they experience, and this addition of this magical element to the historical novel gives the author a way to explore those sides to these young women and allow them to explore these sides to themselves in a world that would otherwise have them behave in a very strictly confined manner, and that works so well. And I just fell in love with these books from the get-go. As soon as I picked them up, I could not put them down. I read all three in a row. I felt so attached to the characters, I felt so consumed by their world, and again it just tugged at my emotions in such a real way, and I'm so pleased to say that her other series, beginning with The Diviners, has had the same effect. I have completely fallen in love with this story, which has even more characters in it. It feels like it has so many characters, yet I still have managed to grow attached to each of them and each of their stories, which is an incredibly difficult thing for an author to do. This series is set in 1920s New York during Prohibition, and again our teenage protagonist, in this case Evie, has been sent to live with her uncle in New York. She's from Ohio, and her uncle owns a supernatural or occult museum. Evie is dealing with some own things that have happened to her family in the past. She is making new friends, but amidst this there is also some strange murders going on in New York City. Again, I've just fallen in love with these books. I feel so comforted by their presence. They're another world that I really want to be in when I'm not feeling at my best, and they bring me so much joy. This is escapism at its best. But next up is a series I never thought I would fall in love with as much as I did, and I never thought I would even like, let alone become a rereader of. and that's The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I wasn't going to read this book, I just thought it was going to be an overhyped series, but I watched the first film just casually and actually really enjoyed it. So on the recommendation of my friend Nicola, I decided to start at the beginning and read all of the books, and I am so glad I did. This is some of the best I think that YA has to offer. I think it's a great example of young adult fiction. I'm sure it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I loved these books. They are dystopian novels set in a world in which every year children are taken from each of the 12 districts to compete in the Hunger Games, which is basically a fight to the death. And the purpose of this is to keep the people in the districts subdued. So it is intense, it is incredibly dark, there is themes of PTSD explored in this story, as well as lots of political themes and commentary on our current society. At the same time, they're just incredibly absorbing stories, and with characters who I really grew to care about, particularly the protagonist, Katniss Everdeen. And I have since reread these books a couple of times. I just think they are as good on every reread as they were the first time I read them, and that's something that Harry Potter has to the maximum for me, so I couldn't not compare them. I have to apologise to those of you who don't like dragons, because I'm finding that a lot of the books in this list are dragons, and unsurprisingly a lot of the books in this list are fantasy or kind of science fiction type stories, because I think that's one of the things that's so wonderful about Harry Potter, because it takes you away from this world and into another completely different one, and because of that it conjures up a similar feeling. But I do want to mention another 4-part series, and that is the Rainwild Chronicles by Robin Hobb, beginning with The Dragon Keeper. So this is a story of multiple different characters, and we're following all of their stories, and their lives intersect and become part of the same story as the book progresses. Dragons have been almost extinct in this world for many years, but there is a group of eggs that they have been waiting to hatch, and they have hatched. However, the dragons that are born are much less impressive than the dragons of old. They can't fly, and they're basically wanted rid of. So some people are selected as dragon keepers to travel with these dragons and find them a new home. Essentially though, what is happening is they're just trying to get rid of them, and the people that are asked to accompany them are often people that are also seen as outcasts from this society. So we follow these dragons, we follow their dragon keepers, and we also follow some of the sailors on the ship that helps them along, and a lady scientist who is fascinated by dragons. And all of these characters come together in a really beautiful way. They help each other grow, they find new relationships with one another, and I adored them so much. I remember picking up the first book in the series, and after one page not being able to put it down, because I thought it was such a wonderful combination of complex fantasy and beautiful prose, which is so special to find. But the last book I'm going to mention today is actually the only one on this list that isn't a series, and that is Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton. Now I think it's easy to compare series to Harry Potter, and it's easy to feel a similar attachment to series in the way I did to Harry Potter, because they're long drawn out stories where the characters get a lot of time to develop, and develop new relationships at that. So that's why they have similar impacts on me. But Tooth and Claw almost managed this in quite a short space, and I'm so sad that it's not actually part of a series. It's set in a 1800s-esque setting, however it's a fantasy world where there are absolutely no humans, so all of the characters are dragons. Despite this, we follow the plot of what is almost a Jane Austen or an Anthony Trollope type story, very much a piece of historical fiction, with these dragon protagonists. But it has been well constructed by the author. It works. She has thought through the intricacies of how this world would work if these characters are dragons, and it doesn't just feel like Elizabeth Bennet has been replaced by a dragon. It feels more complex than that, and it's such an immersive fantasy world. I adored reading this book. I could not put it down, and I was devastated when it was over. And despite the fact that these characters weren't even humans, I felt so attached to them, and that is an impressive thing for an author to accomplish. So I would say the way I felt when I was reading this mimic the way I felt when I read Harry Potter. But those are all the books I wanted to mention in this video. I hope perhaps these books can maybe make you feel a little bit like the way Harry Potter did. Not to compare them, they are wonderful pieces of literature in their own right, but if you're looking for that really immersive escapist sensation that you maybe felt from Harry Potter, then they might be able to offer you that. I would love to hear from you about the books that have made you feel as wonderful as Harry Potter has and you have grown as attached to as you did with Harry Potter, if of course you're a Harry Potter fan, that is, although I assume you like Harry Potter to some degree if you're watching this video. Oh, and I will mention that later this week you will also be seeing the third episode in my Harry Potter and Classics series, which is covering all of the characters and creatures from The Prisoner of Azkaban that take their inspiration from Greece or Rome. If you are enjoying that series, then do keep an eye out for that video, as like I said, it will be up later this week, and if you haven't watched it yet, I will link the first in that series down below. But until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!